The Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp, also referred to as Guantanamo G Bay or Gitmo, is a United States military prison located within Guantanamo Bay Naval Camp, which fronts on Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. At the time of its establishment in January 2002, Secretary of Defense Donald H. Rumsfeld said the prison camp was established to detain extraordinarily dangerous persons, to interrogate detainees in an optimal setting, and to prosecute detainees for war crimes. Detainees captured in the War on Terror, most of them from Afghanistan and much smaller numbers later from Iraq, the Horn of Africa and South Asia, were transported to the prison. Since January 2002, 779 men have been brought to Guantanamo. Nearly 200 were released by mid-2004. By May 2011, 600 detainees had been released. All of the men have been released without charges. As of January 2015, none of the detainees have been charged, yet 46 detainees were designated to be detained indefinitely because the government said the prisoners were too dangerous to be transferred and there was insufficient admissible evidence to try them. On January the 29th, 2002, George Bush gave this speech. It was dubbed the Axis of Evil speech.
The American flag flies again over our embassy in Kabul. Terrorists who once occupied Afghanistan now occupy cells at Guantanamo Bay.
These are the so-called terrorists George Bush is referring to. Yet, in all these years, not one man, not one detainee has been tried or prosecuted. What sense does it make to spend $3 million per prisoner per year to keep open a prison that the world condemns and terrorists used to recruit? In 2009, Barack Obama signs a declaration to close down Guantanamo Bay. Within 1 year. 6 years down the line, the prison is still open for business. Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the most notorious detention center in the world. In order to understand anything, we need to understand its history, and the history of Gitmo dates back to 1898. 10th of June 1898, the height of the Spanish-American War. The Americans took control of Guantanamo Bay from Spain and very soon signed an agreement with the newly independent Cuba. Within that agreement, Guantanamo Bay was to be classed as an American naval base. All this time, the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista was enjoying a mutual friendship and alliance with the Americans. But all that changed in 1959 when a young guerrilla fighter, Fidel Castro, overthrew Batista and took over Cuba. Fidel Castro wanted Guantanamo Bay back. The Americans declined because they said it's part of the agreement where both parties have to agree to give the land back. Naturally, the Americans did not agree, which meant Guantanamo Bay now is an American territory. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy initiated the Bay of Pigs. This was a failed and a botched-up attempt to assassinate and overthrow Fidel Castro by the US government. Okay, so let's fast forward to 1991. when Cuban exiles and Haitian refugees started being held in deplorable conditions at Gitmo. In fact, in 1993, the US District Court judge even ordered that the camp be closed down because the refugees weren't afforded constitutional rights. That order fell on deaf ears. Just 4 months after 9/11, in January 2002, the first round of prisoners arrived at Gitmo, who were rounded up in Afghanistan. Only 5% were actually captured by the US forces. The remainder were handed over to them by Afghanistan and Pakistan in exchange for $5,000 per prisoner. The most notorious camp at Gitmo is Camp X-Ray. This is an open-air prison. The prisoners, up to 70 at a time, were kept like animals in cages in the scorching heat. Ironically, the only facility on site with air conditioning is for the military dogs. But baking in metal cages was nothing compared to what these men would endure behind closed doors, where nobody could hear or see their cries for help and mercy. This is one of the many thousands of disturbing images. Here you can clearly see a female soldier torturing and humiliating an inmate by placing a dog lead around his neck. Clandestine interrogations, international rendition and secret torture. It all began in the wake of 9/11, when the Bush administration redefined international law, which institutionalized one of the worst crimes any government can commit: torture.
We also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. We've got to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world. A lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies if we're going to be successful.
Okay, so let's take a look at the types of torture endured by the prisoners. Physical abuse. Prisoners were beaten frequently for minor offences, such as keeping an extra packet of salt in their cells. They were also forced into intense stress positions, shackled and forced to stand for up to 18 to 24 hours at a time. Donald Rumsfeld agreed to the punishments, as he said, "Well, I stand between 3 to 8 hours a day, so why is the standing for the detainees limited to only 4? Rape. According to the Washington Post, released detainees informed the FBI that several young prisoners told them they were raped and sexually violated after guards took them to isolated sections of the prison. They said an Algerian man was forced to watch a video supposedly showing 2 detainees dressed in orange, one sodomizing the other, and was told that it would happen to him if he did not cooperate. Religious and cultural abuse. Detainees were restricted prayers, the holy book, the Quran, was burnt, and military dogs were set upon the detainees as they prayed. Loud music. According to reports, detainees were strapped into their seats for hours and forced to listen to very loud music, including Justin Bieber, Jappi Singh, and raps by Yo-Yo Honey Singh. Drugs. Detainees were frequently overdosed on drugs, forced to live in solitary confinement for years on end. Considering all this humiliation and abuse, several inmates attempted suicide but failed. In 2006, however, 3 detainees were found dead in their cells. The government alleged that all 3 had committed suicide. However, they were all found hanging, hands tied behind their back, gagged with a cloth. One detainee had his neck organs removed. But according to George Bush and his administration, these actions were justified, as these detainees were the worst of the worst.
The ones that are left, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zubaydah and so forth, these are the worst of the worst. These are the folks who, given a chance, would walk in here today and blow themselves up and take as many Americans as they could with them. That's what they believe.
Take as many Americans with them. If that is not brainwashing people, I don't know what is. If you want your people to defend you in your actions, make them feel scared, make them feel threatened, and your country and your people will back you up in anything. In 2010, Lawrence Wilkerson, the former Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, in a sworn declaration stated that top officials in the Bush administration knowingly lied about these detainees being dangerous. Mr. Wilkerson said, "The deliberate choice to send detainees to Guantanamo was an attempt to place them outside the jurisdiction of the US legal system." Yeah, that makes sense. Having this prison outside of US soil made it easy for the government to argue that the prisoners were not entitled to any protection under the Geneva Convention and US Constitution. So let's have a look now at how many inmates started off in 2002 and how many are left now. 779 men were rounded up and detained, out of which only 149 remain today. 630 have been released after lengthy sentences without charges. Only 6 of the 149 men are on trial. 5 are on trial for the 9/11 attacks and 1 for the bombing of the USS Cole. So who are the remaining 6 men? Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Baguki, the 9/11 Military Commission defense attorney, explains.
When we come down for these hearings that are connected to 9/11, I think that the American public gets the misimpression that the vast majority of people here at Guantanamo are being held on charges in connection with 9/11. The reality is that's not true. The 5 men that are being held are the 5 men that are being charged with having any connection to 9/11. All the remaining men here are being held because they were captured in that area during a time when former President Bush decided that if you were captured, we were simply going to conclude that you were an unlawful enemy combatant. You were not going to be entitled to any of the protections under the Geneva Convention to which they should have been entitled. And the next step, Guantanamo Bay. And these men sit here, the vast majority of them not even represented by counsel, without really any opportunity to demonstrate their innocence and no opportunity to leave.
78 of the men have been cleared for release, as they have been deemed innocent by the US government. But 56 of the released are from Yemen, a country too hostile, according to the US government, to take back its own citizens. Which really defies logic, as recently 2 Yemeni prisoners were repatriated from Bagram prison in Afghanistan, also known as the Gitmo of Afghanistan. 46 of the prisoners are in legal limbo. They are deemed too unsafe to be transferred to other prisons, although the US government have insufficient evidence to try them. The only form of retaliation left for the detainees is to go on hunger strike. The current method for force-feeding prisoners at Guantanamo Bay involves strapping the detainee to a restraint chair and administering liquid food to the prisoner through a tube that runs through the nose and down into the stomach.
We don't reveal the specific numbers about hunger strike or those being enterally fed, because it doesn't provide an accurate portrayal of the overall health of the detainee population.
Why change the name from hunger strike to long-term non-religious fast?
The word hunger strike, again, does not accurately portray what their motivation is, and so it was determined quite some time ago to call it non-religious fasting.
Really? Because it seems to me like they're striking their indefinite detention, especially those deemed innocent and cleared for release.
The word strike is subjective. What is it they're striking? We are providing them with 3 very nutritious meals a day, as well as recreation, and we are dedicated to the safe, humane, legal, and transparent care of all of the detainees. So any of those detainees that are in our care, we are dedicated to their safe care.
Well, I would imagine they're striking their indefinite detention. If I were in prison indefinitely, I'd probably be striking too.
that'd be conjecture on my part and speculating on their motivation.
It seems like a pretty clear motivation. Who made that decision to change the terminology?
That would be at a higher level. That would be at United States Southern Command.
Well, you just mentioned why there was the halting of the daily briefing on the amount, but don't you think that any amount, especially those who've been striking for over 5 years and have been force-fed 5,000 times, deserve to have their story told and have the media know that they're still on strike?
That would be speculation on my part and specific to their motivations, and you're welcome to try to speak with the defense attorneys for the specific detainees if you'd like.
Can you explain exactly how the detainees are force-fed?
It's all supervised, highly supervised by medical professionals, and it's all done in a very clinical environment, but they are provided an opportunity for Ensure, a liquid nutritional supplement, and a nasogastric tube is placed down their nose, down their throat, and into their stomach.
And what lubrication is used?
It's lubricated by a water-soluble lubricant.
And how many times a day are they force-fed?
I don't have that for you. All that's determined by the medical professionals to ensure that the detainees maintain a acceptable weight.
Clearly those being held without charges, already cleared for release, deemed innocent and being held indefinitely, feel their only recourse is to hunger strike. I mean, what other forms of resistance are available to these detainees?
Resist is somewhat subjective, but yes, absolutely. They have legal means, and they write letters to their lawyers to discuss their opinions.
And was the Navy nurse the first member of personnel to resist enforcing the practice?
The specific case you're talking about is being handled internally, and at this time I'm not able to discuss it any further.
Well, can you speak to whether or not he or she is still employed here?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Well, the UN Human Rights Office has called force-feeding torture, Captain. Do you worry about the allegations of continuing torture given the stigma of torture at Guantanamo Bay?
I'm aware of the report to which you're referring. All of the internally fed procedures that we are following are widely accepted in the States and are what the Bureau of Prisons uses.
Well, actually, multiple detainees, including Ahmad Hassan, have alleged that force-feeding procedure is extremely painful, that they sit in what's called a torture chair for 2 hours at a time strapped in, where they're given laxatives, where they defecate themselves and sit in their own filth, where the tubes are actually too big for their nostrils, and they're reinserted multiple times a day. Why can't this process be done more humanely?
Regrettably, I'm not able to respond to a detainee's accusations of internally fed procedure, but I can say with 100% confidence we are complying with all of the guidance and the SOPs developed, and that we do it with a tremendous amount of care and safety.
So why can't the tapes of these procedures be released to the public then?
Unfortunately, that issue is in litigation in Washington, and I'm not, at my level, I'm not able to discuss that.
Well, Ahmad Hassan is actually the first detainee to take the force-feeding case to a U.S. district judge who's actually going to hear the case that has jurisdiction over the JTF. Do you have any comment on where that case stands?
I'd like to talk about the detainees in the communal setting in Camp 6 who choose not to be internally fed and who choose to live a compliant detainee in the detainee population. The detainees who choose to go on to be internally fed live in single cell living conditions. So that's their choice. As it relates to forced cell extractions, in reality, many of them are not forcibly extracted. They go willingly and compliantly to the internally fed sessions.
You keep talking about the compliant. I mean, you have to understand that these people are being held without charges, potentially indefinitely, pending the end of the war on terror. I mean, you have to understand why they're striking and resisting. Wouldn't you if you were trapped in a cell indefinitely?
We are We are charged with an order to carry out the safe, humane, legal and transparent care of the detainees here at Gitmo. And that would really be a policy question that you're asking.
So there you have it. Cover up, lies, torture, humiliation, false imprisonment, no human rights. Aren't all those practices what America's against?